Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano board. In the first video that we did, I talked about not liking a lot of the control options for the system, so what I've done here is I've combined together what I think would be the best kit that you could have as far as having the right controllers for each core that you may want to play. Now it is totally subjective. It bothers me to not play the original cores and the original controllers. For some people, they might not mind as much, but this is my best advice on what controllers you should be able to use for your MiSTer to get the best experience out of each core. Before we get too far involved, you can do me a huge favor. Down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined, we got a Patreon link down there as well if you want to support the channel. But there's a ton of options for MiSTer. Basically, the rule of thumb is if it's a USB controller, you can pretty much plug it in, map it, and it should work. Here I have an Xbox One controller, a Switch Pro controller, a PlayStation 4 controller, a Sega Saturn aftermarket controller, and an 8-bit DOE PC Engine TurboGrafx controller. And no matter what option you use, if you plug these in via USB, all of them are going to function on your MiSTer. And I like using different controllers for different purposes. And that's what this video is all about, because a lot of the original hardware for me is the control scheme. If the buttons aren't in the right place, it doesn't feel correct to me, because I grew up playing all the cores that are on the MiSTer. But as far as how to make a controller work with the MiSTer if it's USB, all you need to do is plug it in. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, USB ports, you're always going to pick the wrong side first, and you got to spin them around. That's just rule of thumb. But the only thing you need to do to make this controller work is to plug the USB in and then go into the MiSTer menu and map the controller. I showed that in my original video and I'll show it later on in this one. Whether it's that Sega controller, whether it's the 8-bit DOE TurboGrafx controller, any of them, you're going to do it the exact same way if you want to use USB. Plug it in, map it, you're good to go. One rule of thumb is that the MiSTer is really light, so don't pull it off a table with a USB cable. I've never done it, but you could. Now, the nice thing about these 8-bit DOE controllers and the Sega Saturn controllers is that they can also not be used over USB. This is a wireless signal. The other one's going to be Bluetooth, but this works when you pair them, and it acts like a normal USB controller. Now, there is going to be a little bit more lag, but honestly, when you're playing on a PVM, it is so imperceivable to me that it doesn't bother me. You can totally use these wireless, or you can pair them. And like I said, depending on the technology, they pair in different ways. This aftermarket Sega Saturn pad has a button to pair, where the 8-bit DOE controller just pairs with a button on the controller, nothing on the dongle itself. They both work though. Some of these controllers don't work as well as others, and these are ones that I've tested, and I can confirm that at least on my MiSTer setup, they're great. Now, we do have other options, and that is Bluetooth. But keep in mind, not every single Bluetooth adapter will work with MiSTer. This one right here does. I purchased this on Amazon. It was $7. I'll leave a link in the description below, and I make no money off of those things. But this is the model number. ZEX MTE CSR 4.0 USB. I can confirm that works with the MiSTer. You don't just plug it in though, you need to pair it. And if you have the I/O board here, which everyone should have, you'll see that OSD or on-screen display button. You need to hold that down to get into the Bluetooth pairing mode. And you'll see here with my arm in the way, it's the best I could do without blocking the light. If we hold that down, MiSTer is going to start using that Bluetooth USB adapter, and it's going to search for Bluetooth devices that are in pair mode. You need to put your controller in pairing mode for it to be found, but I've tested this with the DualShock 4 controller and with a Switch Pro, and it works perfectly fine. You just need to push whatever button will sync it to Bluetooth. On the Switch Pro, that's on top, and you'll see now everything works perfectly fine. On the PlayStation 4, it's a little bit interesting. All you have to do is hold down the PlayStation button in the middle as well as the share button until the controller starts flashing, and then it'll start pairing. It's a little odd, but that's how you do it, and this adapter, like I said, works perfectly. Now, the first time you plug a new USB controller into the MiSTer, it is going to do absolutely nothing. And in the original How to Set Up a MiSTer for the First Time guide, I showed you that you needed to use a keyboard, and if you're just getting into the series here, I'll leave that down below. But use whatever controller you have to get to the setup menu, and then we start configuring the controller. It's configurable, but it will not work with the MiSTer menu until you go into the define button set and you define every single input. Just follow along with the prompts on the screen, everything will work perfectly fine. There are more inputs than you need though on the MiSTer, so once you see a mouse move right, you can just start clicking the user button to make sure that's undefined. We'll just keep scrolling through, but don't go so fast, because when you get to menu, you want to set a button on the controller as your MiSTer menu button so you can get back into your core menu. From there, you can just keep hitting user user until you get back to the main menu, and now you'll see this controller works perfectly fine via USB. Just make sure you map it first. And like I said, trying to capture a PVM on camera can be a little bit tricky, so ignore the flashing, but now we're playing a Super Nintendo game with that DualShock 4 controller, and I like the button layout because it mirrors a Super Nintendo button layout. You could get an 8-bit Super Nintendo controller and totally use that as well, but for me, I like having the least amount of controllers for any particular use. So something like the Switch Pro controller, or the DualShock 4, or the Xbox One controller, they give me the best use across multiple cores. But going to something like Sega Genesis or Sega CD, I can't stand that type of controller because the Sega Genesis shipped with a 3-button controller, and those 3 buttons are in an arcing line, and I need to have that same feel. So this aftermarket Sega Saturn wireless controller with that wireless dongle right into the MiSTer is my preferred way to play something like the Genesis, and I will have a list of all my recommended controllers to cores at the end of the video. Again, sorry about the flashing, that's just how these things capture because of the refresh rate. But this feels exactly like it should if you grew up playing Genesis, or if you want to play it with the most accurate controller layout, because the DualShock 4, you'd have to play in a triangle, and that just doesn't feel right to me, and it's really important for feel. Now, the same thing goes with something like the TurboGrafx or PC Engine. The original controller had the buttons in a line just like this one, and I will show you here, compared to the Switch Pro controller, those buttons in a line are how I remember things being, versus the Switch Pro controller or the DualShock 4, they're off at an angle, and that just doesn't feel, again, natural. But if we use this 8-bit controller, it's exactly like you would want a TurboGrafx or PC Engine, or in this case, the SuperGrafx, to play. And I finished Run to a Blood from the start to the end on my MiSTer with this controller, and it felt exactly like playing it on the original PC Engine controller. Of all the aftermarket controllers that kind of emulate the layout of an original, I think that this 8-bit TurboGrafx or PC Engine controller is one of the best on the market. And again, it's just the way the buttons are laid out. I absolutely need the buttons where they're supposed to be, or else I can't play the game as well. And like I said, that might not be as important to you, and if that's the case, any one of these, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch Pro controllers I've shown you will be fine. The only other thing you want to deal with if you are playing wired, and I'm not going to switch it because there is no USB here, is fast USB pulling on is a little bit less laggy, but it is experimental, so if it doesn't work for you, just turn it off. But what I recommend for this controller here is Sega Genesis core, Sega CD core, and if we get lucky one day, obviously the Sega Saturn core. That's what this controller works the best for. Now moving over to the TurboGrafx or PC Engine, obviously, PC Engine and TurboGrafx, it's also great for the Master System, the NES, and the MSX, because all those systems had the buttons in a straight line. Now going to something like the Xbox One, Switch, or PlayStation controller, Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, Game Boy Advance, and Game Gear all have buttons that are slightly angular, where you see the X and the 0 on a line. They work perfect. Now, for something like Arcade or Neo Geo cores, none of these controllers are good, and in another video I'll be doing the Damon Bright mod to use my original arcade sticks, because none of these controllers work half a damn for Neo Geo. But that's kind of your options right there. This is just what I recommend. Google what other people do. Just Google MiSTer controllers FPGA and you'll find stuff. This is what I like, and this is what I've tested that works. But basically, if it's a USB controller, you should be able to use it. But don't buy any wireless, whether they are 2.4 gigahertz or Bluetooth adapter controllers, until you Google to see if they work with MiSTer, because not all of them do. But if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I love chatting with you guys. And if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Helps me out. I'll be back with another MiSTer video next week, and I'll have videos on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday as well. Short of that, thanks so much for watching, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.